The first notice arrived without warning. It said I was in violation and had 10 days to comply or face fines. It was for my driveway, not the surface, not damage, the angle. According to the letter, my vehicle was not aligned correctly when parked overnight. The rule cited was unfamiliar. I checked the handbook. The wording was vague. No angle was specified, no measurement, just a sentence about proper alignment. I took a photo of my driveway that evening, then another the next morning. Same position, same angle. Nothing had changed. I did not respond. 3 days later, a second notice arrived. Identical language, new date, same violation. I compared the timestamps. The inspection time listed was before sunrise. I was awake at that hour. No one had been there. I added the letters to a folder. At the next HOA meeting, I sat in the back. I listened. Parking violations were discussed briefly. The board president mentioned increased compliance issues. No addresses were named. No vote was taken. The subject moved on. After the meeting, I walked the neighborhood. I noticed something I had not paid attention to before. Several vehicles were parked at sharper angles than mine. Some blocked sidewalks. One was partially on the curb. None had notices on their doors. I photographed them, not dramatically, just enough to show position and date. The following week, I received a fine. The amount was small. The letter said it would increase if the violation continued. It referenced the same rule. Still no measurement. Still no definition. This time, I sent an email. I asked for clarification. I asked for the specific standard being applied. I asked how compliance was measured. The response arrived 2 days later. It was brief, polite, non-specific. Standards are determined by the board and enforced uniformly. I saved the email. I adjusted my parking slightly anyway, not because I agreed, but because I wanted to see what would happen. 2 days later, another notice. Same violation, same language. The inspection time again showed early morning. Again, I was awake. Again, no one had come by. I stopped adjusting. Instead, I began documenting more carefully. I printed the rulebook and highlighted every section related to parking. There were only 2. Neither mentioned angles. I checked the amendment log. No changes. I checked older versions stored online. Same wording. I requested inspection records. The request was acknowledged. No documents were provided. At the next meeting, I listened again. A homeowner asked about inconsistent enforcement. The board president said enforcement was complaint-driven. Another board member said inspections were routine. Both statements were accepted without comment, despite contradicting each other. I wrote both down. After the meeting, I walked again. I began noting patterns. Certain streets were inspected more often. Certain homes were never cited. The same names appeared repeatedly on violation letters posted in public areas. Mine was one of them. I checked property records. The board president owned 2 units. A treasurer's relative owned a landscaping company under contract with the HOA. A committee chair lived directly across from me. None of this proved anything, so I did nothing with it. Then, a new notice arrived. This one cited landscaping. My grass was allegedly a 1/4 inch too long. The inspection time again preceded sunrise. I measured the grass myself, twice, different spots. It was within limits. I photographed the ruler in place. I took wide shots. I noted the date and time. I did not appeal. I waited. Within a week, I received a warning about trash bins, placement, timing, another fine if repeated. I reviewed the rule. It allowed a 12-hour window. Mine had been inside it. I checked the inspection time. Again, before sunrise. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat near the window. Around 5:10 a.m., a car slowed near my house. No one got out. It paused. Then it drove on. At 9 a.m., a violation notice was on my door. I added a new section to the folder. Inspection anomalies. I still didn't respond. I didn't argue. I didn't confront anyone. I just kept records. because by then, it was clear this wasn't about parking or grass. It was about control, exercised quietly, and written badly. I began treating each notice as a data point, not a provocation. Every letter was scanned, every envelope photographed. Dates, times, language, and cited rules were logged in a spreadsheet. I stopped guessing intent and focused on patterns. The inspection times continued to stand out. Nearly all were listed between 4:45 and 5:30 a.m. No inspector names, no vehicle numbers, just HOA compliance. I requested the schedule. The reply stated inspections were variable. No schedule existed. Inspectors were unnamed contractors. Oversight was internal. I saved the response. At the next meeting, I requested to speak during open comment. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't raise my voice. I asked a single question. How are inspections verified if they occur outside staffed hours? There was a pause. The board president said verification was administrative. Another member said inspectors logged reports digitally. A third said complaints triggered follow-ups. 3 answers, 1 question. I wrote them down. After the meeting, I submitted a formal records request. I asked for inspection logs, contractor invoices, and enforcement criteria for the last 6 months. The HOA acknowledged receipt. The deadline passed. Nothing arrived. 2 weeks later, another fine appeared. This one cited repeat non-compliance. The language was sharper. The amount doubled. I paid it, not because I accepted it, but because I wanted to remove one variable. No unpaid balances, no justification for escalation. Then I noticed something else. Homes that received repeated violations were clustered. Same side of the neighborhood, same few streets, all older residents. None of them had board representation. I introduced myself to a few of them. Not about the HOA, just normal conversation. Gradually, the subject came up on its own. They showed me their notices. The wording was identical to mine. The inspection times were similar. The rules cited were the same vague sections. One neighbor mentioned she had appealed twice. She never received a written response. Another said his fine disappeared after he stopped attending meetings. A third said he had been warned not to push back. I asked if any of them had received inspection photos. None had. I added another tab to the spreadsheet, comparative enforcement. The landscaping company began appearing more often. Trucks parked overnight, trailers left for days, no notices. The company belonged to a relative of the treasurer. The contract had been renewed quietly the previous year. I checked the minutes. The renewal vote was listed as unanimous. Attendance showed only 3 board members present. The bylaws required 5. I highlighted the discrepancy. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I sent another records request, this time narrower: meeting attendance logs, contractor bids, inspection authorization policies. This one was partially fulfilled. I received redacted minutes, invoices without signatures, no inspection logs. The cover email stated some records were not retained. I saved that too. At the following meeting, the board announced a new enforcement initiative: increased compliance, zero tolerance, community standards. No vote was recorded. The week after, violations spiked. Not everywhere, only in the same cluster. I installed a camera facing my driveway, not hidden, clearly visible. The next inspection time listed was 5:12 a.m. The footage showed nothing. No car, no person, no inspection. I clipped the video and archived it. 2 days later, I received a letter stating cameras violated privacy rules. I checked the rulebook. Cameras were permitted if they did not face into windows or yards. Mine didn't. I documented the contradiction. At that point, the pattern was complete. Rules were being interpreted privately. Inspections were being logged without verification. Records were missing selectively. Authority relied on process, not accuracy. I still didn't confront them. Instead, I organized everything.
chronologically, cross-referenced, labeled. I created a timeline that showed enforcement actions occurring before meetings, before complaints, and sometimes before the supposed inspections themselves. I requested one final thing: a written explanation of enforcement criteria and inspector accountability. The response came from the HOA's attorney. It stated, enforcement discretion rested solely with the board. No further clarification would be provided. That was the first time legal language entered the conversation. I added a final section to the folder: admissions, because discretion, once written down, is no longer invisible.
Once discretion was stated in writing, the process changed. Not outwardly, not immediately, but the margins narrowed. I stopped communicating verbally. Everything went through email or certified mail. Each message referenced a specific document. Each request was limited in scope. No opinions, no accusations, just records. I contacted the county clerk and requested public filings related to the HOA, articles of incorporation, annual statements, registered agents. There were gaps. 2 annual reports were missing. One filing listed an outdated board composition. The treasurer named in county records no longer appeared in meeting minutes, yet still signed checks. I documented the inconsistency. Next, I reviewed state statutes governing community associations, not selectively, line by line. I highlighted retention requirements, notice obligations, quorum rules, and member access rights. Several provisions matched what I had already observed. I sent one more records request. This time, I cited the statute numbers. I asked only for documents the law explicitly required to be retained. The response arrived on time. It included fewer redactions. Still no inspection logs. Still no contractor bids. But something else changed: the tone. The email warned that excessive requests could be deemed disruptive. It suggested future correspondence go through counsel. I acknowledged receipt. Then I waited. 2 weeks passed, no new violations. Then a notice appeared for someone else. Same cluster, same language. I reached out quietly and asked if I could copy it. The inspection time again preceded sunrise. The homeowner had been awake. No one had come by. I added it to the timeline.
At the next meeting, attendance was lower. The board moved faster. Items were bundled. Votes were recorded without discussion. I noticed something specific. Meeting minutes were now being approved at the end of the same meeting in which they were written. No review period, no corrections. That mattered, because errors could no longer be attributed to memory. They were immediate. I filed one more request. This one went to the state agency that oversaw community associations. I did not allege misconduct. I submitted a neutral inquiry with attachments. I asked whether inspection logs were required to substantiate fines. I asked whether discretion allowed deviation from written rules. I asked whether quorum requirements could be waived for contract renewals. The response took time. While waiting, I received a notice rescinding my last fine. No explanation, no apology, just adjusted. I documented that too. Then another rescission followed, then another. The pattern reversed. Violations continued elsewhere, but fewer, less frequent, less precise. At the next meeting, the board announced a temporary pause on enforcement to review procedures. No vote was recorded. I did not attend that meeting. 2 weeks later, I received an email from the HOA's attorney requesting a call. I declined. I asked for written correspondence only. The reply stated the board was conducting an internal audit. I requested a copy when complete. There was no response. Then the state agency replied. It did not issue a ruling. It didn't need to. It cited the statutes. It clarified obligations. It outlined consequences for non-compliance. I forwarded the response to the HOA. No commentary, no cover letter, just the document. 3 days later, meeting minutes were reposted with corrections. Attendance numbers changed. Vote tallies were updated. The landscaping contract was listed as under review. An emergency meeting was scheduled. This time, quorum was present. During open comment, no one spoke. The board announced changes to enforcement procedures, written standards, documented inspections, independent oversight. No one explained why. I didn't ask, because by then, the system was no longer confident enough to pretend nothing had happened. Authority still existed on paper, but its certainty was gone. And without certainty, procedure begins to expose itself.
The changes looked procedural, but they were defensive. New forms appeared, new language, new disclaimers at the bottom of emails. What didn't appear was confidence. Inspection notices now included inspector initials, not names, just letters. Times shifted closer to daylight. Still early, but no longer impossible. I logged the changes. The board stopped using the word uniform. They replaced it with case-specific. That mattered. Uniform implied consistency. Case-specific implied judgment. Judgment requires justification. At the next meeting, I attended again. I sat in the same place. I said nothing. The agenda included a compliance review item. 15 minutes were allocated. It took 40. Board members disagreed openly, not about policy, about interpretation. One member insisted discretion was necessary. Another said discretion had caused confusion. A third asked whether past fines could be challenged. That question was not answered. Instead, the board voted to clarify enforcement authority. The vote passed. The minutes recorded it differently. They said affirmed. I saved both versions. After the meeting, an email went out to residents announcing transparency improvements. It invited questions. I did not respond. Others did. I saw the replies because someone forwarded them to me. Questions about refunds, about prior violations, about appeals that were never heard. The board replied selectively. Some questions were answered, others were ignored. A few received identical copy-paste responses that did not address the question asked. I compared timestamps. Responses arrived late at night, some from personal email accounts, not the official HOA address. I archived them. Then a notice arrived for one of the board members. Parking. Angle. The language was the same as mine had been months earlier. The fine was rescinded within hours. I added it to the comparative log. That was when the resignations started. First, a committee chair stepped down. Personal reasons, no explanation. Then the treasurer announced a leave of absence. The landscaping contract was terminated by mutual agreement. A new vendor was announced. No connection, competitive bid, documented. The board president remained silent through all of it. Violations slowed to a trickle, not just for me, for everyone. Then enforcement stopped entirely. An email went out stating the HOA was updating its compliance framework and that fines were suspended temporarily. No end date was given. I requested one thing: a copy of the internal audit referenced earlier. The response said it was informal and not subject to disclosure. I replied with a statute citation. 2 days later, I received a partial report. It avoided conclusions. It focused on process gaps, missing documentation, inconsistent application. No blame. But accountability does not require blame. It requires acknowledgement. The following meeting was different. Attendance was full. Residents spoke, not angrily, precisely. They asked about records, about appeals, about how discretion had been used. Board members answered carefully. Sometimes they deferred. Sometimes they contradicted earlier statements. Everything was on record. I didn't speak, because by then it was no longer my issue. The system was explaining itself in public, and it wasn't doing it well. Once the questions became public, the board changed posture, not direction, posture. Meetings ran longer, agendas expanded. Legal counsel attended more frequently, though rarely spoke. When they did, it was to suggest tabled items or deferred discussion.
Nothing moved quickly anymore. That, too, was a signal. Enforcement remained suspended. No notices, no warnings, no fines. The language in board communications shifted again. Where they once used will be enforced, they now used may be reviewed. Review is not action. It is delay with formality. Residents continued asking for records, not because I encouraged it, because they had seen what was possible. Some requests were fulfilled, others were denied with explanations that referenced workload or confidentiality. Each denial created another record. I watched the pattern repeat. The board published a revised enforcement policy. It was longer than the original rules, more detailed, more careful. It also contradicted earlier guidance. Inspection windows were now defined, appeal timelines were specified, documentation requirements were listed. None of those had existed before. No one acknowledged that. The board president addressed the community in writing for the first time since this began. The message was measured. It emphasized moving forward, lessons learned, shared responsibility. It did not reference the past. I compared the date of the message with something else, the HOA's insurance renewal. The policy was up for review. Insurers request documentation, claims history, governance practices. Selective enforcement creates risk. Inconsistent records increase exposure. I added that to the timeline. Shortly after, the board announced the creation of an independent compliance committee. Volunteers only, no board members. Oversight authority limited but visible. The announcement framed it as a proactive improvement. No one objected. The committee requested historical records. They received incomplete files. That fact was noted in their first report. Again, no accusations, just absence. Then the attorney stopped attending meetings. Then the board president missed one. Then another. Quorum became difficult to maintain. When meetings lack quorum, votes cannot be taken. When votes cannot be taken, authority pauses. That pause stretched. The state agency followed up, not with penalties, with questions. Requests for clarification, requests for confirmation, requests for documentation that had already been requested internally. The board responded, slowly. Then one more resignation came, not announced at a meeting, filed with the county clerk. I saw it there first. The replacement appointment was delayed, then withdrawn. By then, enforcement had been inactive for months, not by decision, by incapacity. The revised policies existed, but no one implemented them. The committee remained. The process existed on paper, but authority requires people willing to exercise it. Those people were gone. The HOA continued to exist. Fees were collected, maintenance occurred, meetings were scheduled. But something fundamental had changed. Rules were no longer feared, not because they were weak, but because they were finally visible. And visibility removed their leverage. I closed the folder, not because it was finished, but because it was no longer necessary. The system had stopped acting as an authority. It had become an administrative shell.
The end did not arrive with an announcement. There was no vote, no apology, no decisive moment. It arrived as a gradual absence. Meetings were still listed on the calendar, but they were shorter. Some were canceled due to lack of quorum. Others ended early with items deferred to future dates that never came. The independent committee submitted its final report. It did not assign blame. It did not recommend punishment. It stated only that enforcement could not resume until documentation standards were met. Those standards were never met. The board published a notice explaining that compliance enforcement would be transitioned to a monitoring phase. That phrase was never defined. No timelines were attached. No authority was delegated. Residents stopped expecting notices. They stopped checking violation boards. They stopped attending meetings. Not out of anger, out of irrelevance. The HOA still existed, Budgets were approved automatically under default provisions, maintenance contracts renewed without discussion, routine functions continued, but enforcement, the mechanism that once defined its power, remained dormant.
Months later, a new board was elected, not through a contested election, through lack of opposition. Most seats were uncontested. The new members inherited the revised policies. They also inherited the record gaps. They chose not to enforce retroactively, not because they were benevolent, because they could not justify it. One of the new members requested access to historical enforcement files. The response noted that many records were unavailable. Retention policies had changed. The past was no longer reconstructible. Without continuity, authority loses memory. Without memory, it loses precedent. The new board announced a reset. Enforcement would resume only after a full rewrite of the rules, community review, and third-party verification. That process moved slowly. Residents were invited to comment. Some did. Most did not. Life continued. I never received another notice. Neither did my neighbors. Years later, the HOA still functions, but differently. Rules exist, but they are applied cautiously. Every enforcement action is documented, photographed, time-stamped, and reviewed. Discretion is limited. Procedure is explicit. Not because someone demanded it, because the alternative had already failed. I never confronted anyone. I never made a speech. I never sought an outcome. I observed. I recorded. I waited. And when the system could no longer support its own authority on paper, it corrected itself. Not through punishment, through exposure. That is how quiet power ends. Not loudly, not suddenly, but when it is forced to explain itself and cannot.